Welcome to Red Eye Story Hour for tales told after midnight. Today we will read from the first part of Chapter 3 from the novel Outcast, which is the first novel in the Mountain Warriors series. The second part of Chapter 3 should be uploaded in 2 days. Chapter 3. I awoke at dawn and was out of bed within moments of opening my eyes. In the past, I had never had a dream on a drunken night. I usually sleep like the dead until it's time to rise. That night, however, I was plagued by the demons. I was tempted to use a literary device to describe my dreams so that the reader would have thought that I was describing a harsh reality. And then once drawn in, only then would I reveal to the reader that it was indeed a dream. However, I decided against that because this is supposed to be a documentary, and I thought that it would dishonestly yank at emotion. But also, I think it would take away from the actual horror that I felt in the experience. At first, my dreams had flashed through the night as a collage of scenes from the drone footage. The mother carrying the child, the determination of the father, the terror on the faces of the children, the nobleness of the bandit to turn into the protector of the children, the slavering mouths of the undead, their horribly fiery eyes, the belligerence of the robbers, the somber vampire figures who sullenly watched. The dream then became very real. I walked through the dense woods with a sword in hand. I was in the Appalachian Mountains. The day was cold, misty, and dreary. The ground beneath my boots was spongy with water. I experienced things like the weight of the sword as if they were real. Other things felt real, although I had never actually felt them in the past. I felt confident that the refugee family, led by the swordsman father, actually survived. Yet I knew of no way they could have survived. I desired certainty to that dreamed of knowledge. The odd quality of this dream was that the influence seemed to come from outside my head. In a typical dream, I might be a participant, but it felt like a movie. My movie projected on a screen in my head. Everything was from within me, whether conscious or subconscious. No matter how weird the story was, I knew that it was written by my subconscious, no matter how deeply buried from my mind's awareness. I know all this sounds odd, but in this sequence, I felt an outside presence imposing its thoughts, will, and very being into my dream, and subsequently onto myself. It was not quite like a demon possessing my mind, but that is the closest I can describe it. In the dream, I stood in the darkened forest, in the high mountains, sunk deep into the cove. The sun had suddenly set. A drizzly rain misted. It was like I stood in the actual cloud. A ringed rock formation surrounded me, almost like an amphitheater. The ground was marshy, but my feet floated above the water and the spongy mud beneath. I then saw the female vampire. Armed with a slender and ornate sword, she walked in my general direction, but didn't look at me. I was an invisible and untouchable observer. She was also too enthralled with the forest around her to even suspect me. She was as at peace as a vampire could be. Her deep eyes looked over the woods with the fearless gaze of the ultimate apex predator. They were the eyes of a sleek feline, eyes designed to see in the night. Her beauty dazzled me. Her hood was folded back over the shoulders of her cloak. Her lustrous dark hair flowed over her shoulders, and I watched her like a ghost who is confident of his ethereal presence. My excitement built as she neared me. The feelings were simultaneously both fearful and sensual, and I was safe from her. She was no more aware of me watching her then she could have been aware that I saw her from the drone footage. She walked closer, and I could have reached out and touched her were I in solid form. I could smell the sweetness of her pheromones, so faint yet bold enough that I wished to bury my face in her hair and breathe deeply. The forest slowly changed. I was back in my bedroom. She walked past my bed. I desired her. I wished to take solid form. She opened her red, kissable lips and seemed to talk to herself as she said, "This is no place for you." I felt terror strike me. I struggled to move, but I was suddenly held down by an unfathomable weight. I helplessly watched as she turned and looked straight into my eyes. She saw me and could kill me. Frozen, I couldn't move. Beneath the beauty, I could see the evil spirit lurking in her eyes. I suspected it was the same spirit that caused this very dream. "Eric," she finished, "you must not come here." The weight was suddenly removed from me, and I shot bolt upright in bed. I swore as I sat alone in my blankets. In the stillness, my breathing sounded like heavy equipment laboring. I instinctively looked around my studio apartment for the vampiress. I could have sworn she was there. With what had to be my imagination, I could faintly smell her. But I was actually alone with my terror. I had only been asleep for an hour. It was a long way until sunrise. I took a sleeping pill and a melatonin. I struggled back to sleep, but she kept taunting, smiling in my face, rousing me from my sleep. In the throes of my dream, I couldn't pin my emotions for her. Fear? Arousal? It was like feeling all my emotions at once. Despite her warnings and taunts, I could not let go of her pull. I had to see what was at the end of the metaphorical string that she had tied to me. Ironically, I felt the pang of guilt for spending energy on the vampire woman. Jennifer and I weren't officially broken up yet. Somehow, once awake and seeing daylight stream through the windows, her image in my mind disappeared, like a moon shadow in the harsh light of the summer's morning sun. With the morning sunlight, the passions for the vampiress were displaced by the curiosity of the plight of the family. It was wishful thinking that dominated me. Despite the odds, I was sure that the father and the mother had secured their family. They had too much fire in their eyes to die. If people with that spirit to live could succumb to death, who could survive? Their fight culminated in my own desire to fill my own destiny. If they could survive, I could too. I stood from my bed and folded it up into a couch. The strewn sheets and blankets poked out. I didn't care. It matched the clothes, books, and other objects that were scattered over the limited floor space. You'd think in a small studio apartment that I would try every trick in the book for more space, but that fold-away bed was the only effort I made. The studio was supposed to be temporary, but in the past few years it had become my home, and I resented it. In that time I lived in that apartment like I would leave permanently any day. I felt like I walked through a cobwebby fog to the kitchen. I was still a bit drunk from the booze and woozy from the sleeping aids. The hangover was still a little ways off, and I was hoping to beat it. I didn't have time for that crap today. Before sleeping the night before, I practically drowned myself in water in an attempt to rehydrate myself past the hangover. I probably drank over a half gallon and stopped just before the gag effect threatened to kick in. I made some coffee from a stash of real bean, the full strength, that I had saved for a special occasion. This was legitimate coffee, uncut by roasted dandelions, other weeds, or chemicals. It was a valuable rarity. The special occasion I had originally had in mind was to impress a date. However, I needed the pure octane of caffeine today. It worked. Halfway through the first cup, I felt like the sun's beams had pierced through an alcoholic dense fog. By the last drop, the fog was burned away. The path before me was clear. I quickly got dressed to face whatever task was ahead. I then paced my studio apartment until it was 7 o'clock. At that point, I was sure Tommy was awake. He had remained relatively sober the night before. He derived more pleasure watching me make an ass of myself than indulging himself. Today, however, was a new day, and I was a new me. I would not drink again, ever. I dialed his number, and he answered the phone, slow and tired. Yeah? His voice dragged that word as if it had 3 syllables. I couldn't help but laugh. Hey, buddy, it's me, I shouted with excess enthusiasm to mock his sleepiness. What the? Eric? Tommy mumbled. I heard him fumbling as if looking for the clock to see what time it was. Your phone has the time on it, I said. Yeah, he said with irritation. What the hell do you want? Remember what we talked about last night? You said to call you first thing if I was still serious. Here I am, wide awake and serious, I said with a laugh. Damn you, I was sleeping. Hell, you should be comatose after the way you polluted your bloodstream last night, he laughed sleepily. I heard a woman moan sleepily next to him. I couldn't hear the words, but from the fluctuation of the tone, it sounded like she hummed a question. I heard some fumbling, as if he placed a hand over the receiver and scolded her. He started to say to me. Is that Jennifer next to you? I asked jokingly. But it did sound like her. He seemed to hesitate, just long enough so I wasn't sure whether he actually hesitated or was just too sleepy to reply quickly. And then he answered, Hell no. Just joking, I said, although a suspicion tickled an area of my brain that I couldn't scratch. Hold on, he said. I could hear the creak of him sitting up in bed and then footsteps of him walking to another room. When he spoke again, he sounded sharp and fully awake. I could actually picture him in one of his Armani suits instead of pajamas, underwear, or whatever he did or did not sleep in. Actually, I couldn't ever picture him without a nice suit. He probably had a tie and a coat to go with his pajamas. Tommy basically laid out the plan of my day. He instructed me where to go for the medical physical, for the passport to travel across the state into Virginia, and a place to go for governmental secrets on the Forbidden Zone. My clearance would be in place by the time I arrived. The first place to go was a governmental office where I would get my own badge as a personal assistant of his. The title, as it were, would open some doors for me. I was amazed. It was like he had it all planned out for me. In retrospect, I feel like an idiot. Before hanging up, I had to ask, Hey Tommy, what's up with those vampire things? He paused about as long as he did when I asked about if that was Jennifer in his bed, and then answered, Don't even worry about them. They are one of those many doomsday cults of losers that occupy the Forbidden Zone. They're about as dangerous as the vampire wannabes that occupy the golf clubs. Hey, I started to say something else, but I heard the indistinct mumble of a woman calling for Tommy. He said, I'll talk to you later, bro, and he hung up the phone. I pocketed my cell phone and immediately walked out the door.